Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where we talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Your Friendly Neighborhood Spider-Man Season 1, Episode 6. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So first, let's start off with Peter's circumstances. He's hanging out with Nico and Harry because he's trying to make his friends. You know, it's like I got my best friend and my new friend. We're all friends. I'm friends with each one individually. I want us to all kind of be like a trio. And Nico obviously has our reservations. It stems from, hey, you're like my best friend. And once again, I brought it up last episode too. Doesn't seem like Nico really has a lot of friends outside of Pete. And Pete doesn't really have, because I even love that whole situation in class. He's like, hey, can you pass a message on to Nico? And the dude is like, what? No. He's like, come on. He's like, dude, I don't even know you. He's like, oh, okay. Well, hey, I'm Peter Parker. It's like, geez. But it's like, yeah, the only other connective tissue they have is Pearl. But even then, look at Nico only interacting with Pearl that one time. It's kind of like, ooh, she's a pretty girl that, I might be interested in. But it's like, obviously, Pete and Pearl have history because it's, babysitter and stuff like that. But other than that, is we haven't even seen Nico interact with Pearl post that. Once again, Peter ended up being kind of that bridge in a lot of ways. So, once again, I could be completely wrong, but we just don't see Nico interact with anyone, just like we don't see Peter interact with anyone, except, just like Nico had said, you were hanging out with juniors and seniors and now a billionaire. So it's like, yeah, she just feels like she's losing her best friend, but she's willing to give it a try because Pete's pushing for it too much, trying to use math to be like, well, Pete plus Nico are friends. Pete plus Harry is friends equals Pete, Harry, and Nico can be friends all together type of thing. So you automatically knew the Spider-Man of it all would get in the way in more ways than one, it turns out. But you figured something Spider-Man related would get in the way. So I do think it is fascinating later on when Nico does the tarot situation. And it's like, oh, the devil. And it's like, well, there's multiple interpretations of that because it's like, oh, the devil that's kind of got a hold on you. It's like, well, obviously Daredevil shows up in this, also voiced by Charlie Cox. So we'll get to that later. But also it's like, well, the devil you don't know kind of also because you're your dad. So there's layers to that too. That could either account for Matt or that could be in reference to Norman, especially the devil that has a hold on you. It's like your dad does because you don't know how evil your dad potentially are. So that's a whole thing. So, but it's kind of awkward and it's but it starts off a little rough, but they found their ebb and flow when they're basically playing board games, but they're playing them all at once. So they kind of created their own game. I was like, oh, I love that. That's kind of neat. I also gotta love the fact is that May was like, okay, here's all of Ben's VHS tapes, all the R-rated stuff that you're not supposed to watch. I put it at the top. I was like, good on May for that, I guess. I guess she's going out on a date or something. She kind of no, don't wait up. So I wonder what her love life situation. We never really tackled that. And the closest you got was Tony being the man whore that he is. That, funny considering Daredevil was considered one of the biggest man whores in I don't know if all comics, but definitely Marvel. But yeah, there seemed like there might have been a Tony and Aunt May thing based on Civil War. So maybe, I don't remember if that was also in Homecoming or not too. It might have been both, but either way, I'm wondering what her dating life is going to be like. I don't know. I've never really known Aunt May's stories ever involve her finding someone post Ben, because most stories involve her being older. So I don't think that really comes up. I want to say Ultimate Spider-Man touched on that a little bit, her dating life, to my recollection. Once again, I have not seen it in years, so I might be misremembering. Because that was, even though she had the gray hair, that was still a younger Aunt May, so. But like I said, issues and all that aside, eventually Nico and Harry were kind of finding their ebb and flow, but the moment Peter left because of Spider-Man stuff, it kind of got awkward, because it's ugh. It makes a lot of sense because once again, him being the kind of the bridge for that situation kind of made it work. But when remove him from the equation, it's just kind of awkward. So I was kind of thinking Harry really was into the occult stuff, the more supernatural stuff. But it turns out, he doesn't really believe in this stuff. He likes it aesthetically, but he doesn't like really believe in. And Nico's like, well, fine. And he's just like, I'm sorry, I'm not trying to come between you and Pete. She's like, well, me and Pete, we're best friends. We tell each other everything, because Pete isn't just like her best friend. She's like a part of his family, and I think he's a part of hers. So, because Pete was trying to like bond them too over the fact it's of like, oh yeah, like our family situations. It's like, because Harry thought May was his mom, but he's like, no, that's my aunt. My mom passed away a couple years ago, which I'm like, once again, very few adaptations. Once again, I'm not the comic book guy. I don't know, but I don't know too many things that touch on Peter's parents. I think the Amazing Spider-Man movies were going to touch on that, but like I know they revolved around his parents. I want to say Ultimate Spider-Man, the video game, definitely did, because I think that was a connection between Eddie and Peter in that particular continuity. Their parents were friends and scientists or something like that, I believe. So I think it's interesting because he touched on his mom, but he didn't touch on his dad at all. So, but then Harry also talks about having lost his mom, and then Nico's in a foster situation, which once again different what I know of Runaways, because not only did she have a sister, she did also have like a biological sister. She also had both her parents in her life. So I'm like, I think because that's the whole point of the Runaways is like their parents become evil. But that could easily have been like Nico's foster parents in the comics or something like that. But I think this is probably like them going a different route. I mean, maybe there's something to like why, like maybe she was given up for adoption type of situation, and that's why she's in the foster system and has a foster family. Maybe that's the direction this is going, or maybe her parents just aren't around in general, like maybe they died, but who knows. But we'll circle back to the Harry and Nico of it all. Let's shift over to the Norman stuff, where Norman is at like this charity event because of the whole Lagos situation. Obviously, the situation that kicked the whole Civil War situation into motion, and also led to the Accords and stuff like that. Will play a pivotal role in setting that forth. We heard some names getting dropped. One of them I had to rewind because I was like, Eleanor Bishop. I was like, what? I was like, what is that? And I was like, oh, right. Kate's mom, because they were like Bishop Security. And I was like, that feels like that's significant. The other name was probably significant too, but like Eleanor's the one that immediately, like I said, I had to rewind. But I was like, oh, Eleanor Bishop, right. Kate's mom. So I was like, interesting. But Norman talks to Thaddeus Ross, which I thought was interesting, and it's the whole thing about like, oh, what about Steve Rogers? It's like, that's classified, on the hunt for Steve, because there's that period in between Civil War and Infinity War. Obviously, we don't know everything Steve was up to. I don't think they even covered it in Infinity War. I haven't rewatched it in a little bit, so I don't remember. I don't think they ever touched on like all that he was doing at that time. That was kind of, I guess, continuity-wise, somewhat like those years were kind of his quote-unquote nomad years, I guess, in a way. Once again, I'm not that familiar with that character or that run of Steve's story while he was nomad, but still. But it's interesting because like Norman, I don't know if he's trying to get like governmental contracts. I don't know if that's what this is, because he's selling it as like, oh, I've got Spider-Man, but obviously he's hiding Peter's identity. He's like, oh, it's this. So it's like you are trying to sell like, oh, I have this person. I believe in the Sylvia Accord registry and stuff like that. But it's like, oh, he's making his head of security appear to be Spider-Man. I guess because like, oh, if you show that it's Peter Parker, maybe it's a little different when it's like you're putting a kid on blast, like versus but like, and maybe there's something to it where Norman, it's like me holding on to that information. You never want to present all your cards. You always want to keep valuable information to yourself. So he's probably playing both sides of it. Obviously he is using, so it's showing like, showing his cards a little bit more of that altruism isn't really fully there, I guess. But also like the fact is that, he's using Peter, but in multiple ways. Like, oh, like everything's fine. Like we're working together. We're a team, Peter. While also kind of selling you out a little bit to the government, especially with the whole how they feel about superheroes and once again registering and stuff like that. So I don't fully know what. Like I said, other than potentially getting government contracts, trying to be good with the government, that's the only thing I can see Norman potentially benefiting from this in that regard. So, but he is like, that's why he put so much time and effort into Peter, is because you're a product to sell, because he's making it seem like you're an Osborn original. That it's like, right, like And that's what the government wants. They want superheroes they can kind of have be, I mean, that's why the whole John Walker Captain America situation happened, Falcon and the Winter Soldier. So I think Norman's kind of making a similar play, and maybe I'm way off basis. That's just how I'm viewing it currently. So I just thought that was interesting. But either way, break in at the Oscorp, and Peter shows up and runs into Daredevil. Now, what I think it's fascinating is earlier in the episode, Jean randomly kind of came up to that area, and Peter's like, what are you doing here? No one's supposed to be here. And she never put up much fuss, for she's like, oh, you're here. He's just like, yeah, I'm friends with Harry. And she's like, oh, okay. Oh, I guess I'm mistaken, and left. I was like, that's weird. And now for Matt to show up later on, I was like, oh, so there has to be a connection between Matt and Jean, right? I maybe I'm misremembering. I think there was a character I looked up, and maybe it was Jean, but I could swear there's a character I looked up that is somewhat Daredevil-ish. The character isn't Daredevil, but they seem kind of Daredevil adjacent, almost like how Echo's kind of Daredevil adjacent. Like, once again, like, he's blind, she's deaf. I don't remember if this character I looked up was like. That's why I'm like, I don't remember if it's Jean or not. Okay, so I looked it up. I was correct. Her character's name is Finesse. And I did not know this. I just looked the character up previously, but like this time I looked a little deeper. It's like this character is apparently the daughter of Taskmaster, which is interesting. But also, like, I was reading a little tiny first paragraph. It was like, but her past is unclear. Apparently, like, her parents were trained by Taskmaster. I don't know if later comics made it like, no, she actually is Taskmaster's daughter. Whatever the case may be. Which is interesting that she has ties to like Daredevil in this potentially. Not unless those are ended up being completely unrelated. But she does have ties to Norman in the comics. Like, apparently he ended up recruiting her. I don't know if in like the assassin type of way. So I thought that was interesting, especially because I was reading too, like, she is frenemies with Nadia Pym, which I guess is I guess Hank Pym's daughter in the comics. Hope is kind of like in the MCU is like apparently like loosely based on that like character. But either way, just once again, just quick Wikipedia read. But I was like, oh, that's interesting. But like, yeah, maybe because part of me was like, well, her being approached, being a part of all this, maybe her being brought in by Norman was like, maybe like she's working with Matt and like he's like kind of implanted her in Oscorp and make it. Once again, the timing is just interesting. So not unless that's completely unrelated. I mean, Jean could always be tied to Octavius. That could be the route they end up going with that. That might be like that just happened to happen, but it's interesting that the day she would show up there would be the same, day that Nat would break in later that night. So it could be coincidental, or it could just be, like I said, like that is orchestrated between them. But it could easily be like either Matt implanted her there, or she could be there for, it could be Taskmaster, or she's there for Octavius. So who knows? We'll see where that kind of goes. But yeah, Peter faces off against Matt, and obviously, everyone's got their preconceived notions because it's like, oh, like, I mean, come on, you're dressed like the devil. He's like, oh, you got webs and stuff. He's like, yeah, kind of comes with the whole being SpiderMan thing. And yeah, Matt outclasses Peter, which I love the whole thing of like, he's like, oh my God, you're actually a really good fighter. And Matt's like, you're not. Because it's like, yeah, Peter isn't. I mean, maybe in some continuities and stuff like that. I'm like, I don't know if because his style is very free-forming. Like, he has a very freestyle approach to fighting. Because it's just like, yeah, he just uses his acrobatics and his enhanced strength to his benefit. But I don't know if he has a very set martial arts style. I think it's like a very free-form fighting style. I mean, I'm sure he's gone toe-to-toe with Avengers throughout the years and stuff like that, different villains, different people, so he has been trained probably by people maybe like a Daredevil type of thing, so I don't know. I want to say that might be one of the first times I ever saw Daredevil was like, now I'm thinking about like in the 90s Spider-Man cartoon, I do remember that. I don't know. I'm pretty sure I might have saw those episodes when I was younger before I saw like the Ben Affleck Daredevil movie. I think I did. I don't remember. Either way, just kind of got me thinking. But yeah, like, Matt knows that, like, yo, Norman's not the guy you think he is. He has some kind of secrets. And I just, like, yeah, it's just kind of like, I get it, kid. You're trying to do the right thing. Which is ironic considering the fact is that Matt would later on, who knows how this continuity is going to play out, but would later on represent you post, your identity being announced to the world in No Way Home. Also, I think it's interesting he's wearing the suit, because I was about to say, like, timeline-wise, this would be like, this is 2016-ish, and I was like, right, that would have been, I mean, who knows, obviously Daredevil season 1 came out in 2015, so it's kind of set in 2015, but who knows how much time that season crosses over, because that could have crossed over into 2016 type of situation. But even then, it's like, well, he had the red suit by then, but we know Marvel continuity wise with Daredevil, Born Again, and even him and She-Hulk, they does have multiple suits, which in the Netflix version he never did. So that might be one of those changes where it's like, even though we never got to see them, like maybe he had other adventures around season 1, 2, and 3 that involved him having other suits, or maybe that's just like a slight change to the MCU timeline by making it like, no, not that's a slight change from the Netflix stuff of like he's had multiple suits. So because this is like a just full blown black suit, but it's obviously not his more traditional one he started off with in season 1 and eventually went back to for I think most of season 3, if I remember, or at least a good chunk of season 3, but maybe most of season 3. So I don't know. Just think that's kind of interesting. But yeah, like him just effortlessly beating Peter, just like ricocheting like his baton and just like knocking Peter out. So, but Norman tried to spin this to be like, oh, he's got to be working for Otto. I think it's so interesting that he picked now, because I'd wondered about that previously. I was like, does he not know it's Otto? Like, it seemed like it kind of registered him, like he recognized it, but he never, turns out he did know, he just didn't say anything. But he's like, oh, I wanted to wait till I knew. It's like, you knew immediately it was Otto, you just chose now to be the perfect time. Why? I guess because Peter's going to be a little suspicious because Daredevil told him all that stuff. I was like, oh, you got a secret and stuff like that. It's like, well, I got to tell you this thing I've been looking into. And it's like, oh, this guy, we were contemporaries. In fact, he worked at Oscorp until he was jealous of me and his arrogance got the best of him. So he decided to leave. So it's like, oh, he could never accept the fact that I was better than him, yada, yada, yada. I'm assuming, I think a lot of that is true, but Norman trying to paint it as like, oh, like he stole tech from us. I'm wondering if it's the vice versa, where Norman stole tech from Otto, stuff that was his life work, and gave birth to like Oscorp. So it's kind of built off of the backbone of like Otto's work and less Norman's, or maybe it was like a, who knows? We'll have to wait to see how that plays out. But like I you know, I brought it up when we were introduced to Otto, that I was like, well, it could easily be a situation that Norman, getting to the top, you're not always the greatest person, so he probably severely screwed over Otto. So I don't know. I mean, it's easy to spin this narrative about him, because yes, he is in fact the one handing out all this tech to criminals. Once again, for what purpose? Beyond like, well, we know he's getting paid for it, but beyond that, we don't know what else is in it for him. Like what, I mean, we know he's trying to prove himself. So some of what Norman said was true, but he's omitting certain things, or at least flipping some truths to benefit him, especially in Peter's eyes, you know? So we'll see where things kind of go on that front. But even Peter had his doubts about Daredevil working for Otto, because like everyone else that is connected to Otto, they've all used some of his tech, but he recognized like, no, this guy was just very skilled and smart. And it's like, well, you know, most of the people that have been kind of utilizing his tech have not been either one of those. So, but he's like, oh, this guy's a professional, like, you know, spinning and weaving this narrative to try and bring Peter in more. So we'll see where things kind of go on that front. And obviously, like, I just love the little bit where just like Peter leaves out the hole that Matt left, and he's just like, and Norman's like, and just puts in a report for a window repair. But yeah, Peter goes back. Just because at first I thought the setup was going to be, we're going to assume that Harry told Nico about Peter being Spider-Man, because he's like, oh wait, she's like, yeah, Peter tells me everything. He's like, well, everything? She's like, yeah. So it's like, oh, so you know Peter's secret? She's like, yeah. Well, you have to be more specific that he's I thought it was going to be something else, and then Peter's going to think Harry told her but didn't, and told her something else. I thought that's what it was going to be, and it was going to be something that kind of bonded them. But no, she did find out he was Spider-Man, but she thought it was a joke. But then she found like the mask and the designs in his book, and it's just like, and obviously Nico is understandably upset, because in her mind it's like, you told Harry before you told me, which to be fair, Harry found out on his own by accident, but it's still the thing of, okay, you never told me one of the most important things. It's like, we've been friends for a while, like you've become like family to me, and then for you to keep such a big secret, because it's like there's probably very few people she's very, very, like, once again, very close to, and now it's like it feels like a betrayal, like you didn't tell me like your most important secret, you know? It's like, well, to be fair, hair haven't told out May either. So, but I'm sure for Nico, it's like, you still could have trusted me with this. You know, even if it's like Harry found out by accident, Harry finding out should have, in her mind, it might be like you should have at least made, you know, considered telling me. But I think it's also just a thing of, once again, it's just in its moment, Nico just feels like she's losing her best friend, understandably. So yeah, it's just definitely going to be interesting to see where things kind of go on that front, you know, as Peter kind of deals with the aftermath of that. Him and Nico are already kind of in a weird spot post last episode, and now it's like, oh, even more so post this episode. So, but another angle to this story is the whole Lonnie situation. Obviously, he kind of gets kicked off the football team. It wasn't really his choice. He was like, the coach kind of made him, and because he's been missing practice. He's also been missing school a lot. And Pearl's asking like, what's going on? Because she can chase it all back. Like, ever since I dropped you off home that day, things have been weird with you. You're trying to pretend like everything's okay, but like whatever's going on, you can tell me. And he says like, right, I made some choices to protect my family, and they come first, you know. And he brings up something I think is interesting, and I think it kind of coincides with the one tit situation where he's like, I've always had to pretend to be someone here at school. I had to play the role of like the perfect student, the perfect athlete. I had to put up like a facade of like, I had to be what this school wanted me to be. I had to fit that image. And now like, I don't have to do that anymore. I think there's some comfortability with being the 1/10 where it's just like, and I think there's a parallel between him and Andre in that regard, because Andre gets pissed at him. It's like, you kind of stole something from me, even though it's like, yo, I was trying to get you not involved with a damn gang. I'm only in my situation right now because of you. But for Andre, it's like, I've always had to live in your shadow. Like, you know how hard it is kind of going about being like, oh, you're Lonnie's little brother. I can't just be Andre. I'm Lonnie's little brother, understandably. And yes, like you're young and you want your own identity. So yeah, you're going to do some stupid, foolish stuff, not thinking it through. But it's like, it feels like he's more pissed about that than he is the situation Lincoln in. But he's like, yeah, like, I mean, Lonnie is in. And it's like, yeah, you think mom and dad are not going to know like something's up? And it's just, yeah, it's just, I mean, it's not like, you know, Andre's really, it doesn't seem as like broken up about it. He just feels like you stole my spot. That's what that's mainly coming from, rather than like, yo, you're mixed up in something dangerous. It's like, I wouldn't be in this situation if it wasn't for you. And maybe there's a little bit of his own guilt in it, or maybe he doesn't feel as guilty. I don't know. It doesn't seem like he feels as guilty in that moment. So Lincoln leaves. I keep calling him by his last name. Lonnie leaves. But obviously a car's out front and you're like, oh boy. So the Scorpions ended up finding out where he lives. It's specifically Carmilla chasing after him, but it was all a ploy to lead them back to the 1/10 hideout, where you're like, oh boy. Scare him enough so that others will bail him out. I mean, because he didn't go back on his own. The others found him and then dragged him. I guess they just happened to see that, or maybe they knew that maybe the Scorpions were a little like got the 1/10 more on high alert, where it's like, oh my god, there's people like coming after their respective members, so that they would be freaked out enough of like, yo, Mac will probably have a specific beef with Lonnie, so let's look after him. A lot of that could play into why they were like Bulldozer and the other dude were there waiting, you know, to bring him there, and he's staying with them. And obviously they found the hideout, so it's like, yeah, stuff is going to pop off there, and sadly Lonnie's going to be smack dab in the middle of it, so things are about to get dangerous, especially because Mac has his suit. So it's interesting too, making it so that, once again, you're changing a lot of continuity stuff and just kind of doing your own thing in a lot of ways. Considering, like I brought up, like I think the classic story, I don't know if they kept this in the comics, but the classic story is like, and maybe I'm conflating this with Rhino, but I swear it's about Scorpion, but maybe it's about Rhino, and I'm misremembering. But like, one the whole point of Scorpion being in a suit was because of J. Jonah. Like, I want to say it was Jonah's the reason why he was stuck in a suit, and that's why he has beef with Jonah. But like I said, that could be Rhino's story, but I swear that's like an older classic version of Scorpion story. And like I said, I don't know if that's like still used in more modern versions of the character or not. So, but either way, he doesn't have the full suit, but he does have at least the torso bit and like the tail. So we'll see. Maybe that's the incomplete version, and maybe next episode we'll get the complete version, or maybe that's all we'll get for this. For now, I don't know. We'll have to wait to see how this all shakes up. But yeah, it's about to turn into a full-blown gang war and Lonnie smack. I mean, already kind of was last episode, but it's about to get even worse now. So it's going to be interesting too with Lonnie mixed in, because eventually Pete's going to get mixed up in it. And it's like, how do you contend with that when you see Lonnie, where you're like, oh, you see the situation he's in and everything. So I'm curious to see how that plays out next episode. I should also just add this here, because I just remembered while I was editing the episode that I completely forgot about the Prowler name drop, because it was during the news that's in the background when Lonnie first gets home, and they said something, I think, about Steve, but then they say like, oh, the Prowler struck again, which I thought was interesting, considering like, well, we know Aaron exists in the MCU timeline because he was played by Donald Glover, but we don't know if he was active as Prowler at the time. It's been a while since I rewatched Homecoming. Wasn't he just like a weapons arms dealer type of situation in that? But I could be misremembering. Maybe it's just kind of a thing of he's more active in this universe. Like maybe he expedited and became the Prowler in this universe, meaning they might try and set up a Miles Morales thing in this particular canon and universe. We'll see how that all plays out, especially knowing like the MCU's timeline and how things are going to be different, because Spider-Man involvement is going to be different with the Avengers versus what it ended up being in the MCU. So we'll see what they tackle that, what they decide to. Obviously, because they're making some pretty massive changes to the continuity and stuff in this series. I was interested to see just, whether there becomes anything of that Prowler situation, because obviously there hasn't become anything of it in the MCU proper, but we'll see. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.